Hey, I'm Anya, Realtor with Bosley Real Estate and host of Who's in My House, the Toronto Real Estate podcast with honest conversations and expert perspectives. Let's see who's in my house. Today we have someone very exciting, City Councillor Josh Matlow. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Do you want to give the audience just a little background on, who you are, what you're all about?
So my name is Josh Matlow. I'm a Toronto City Councillor and I represent Midtown Toronto in the ward of Toronto St. Paul's, which is essentially Eglinton-ish, kind of wiggles around a bit, down to the railroad tracks near DuPont.
Okay.
Mount Pleasant on the east, and Oakwood, and then it kind of curves around at the west.
That general
kind of heart of Midtown Toronto, roughly 115,000 residents. And a lot of my work is, both focused on the community that I live in, but also a lot of big policy work for our city, to make the city a workable and affordable and wonderful place to live. I mean, that's what I want for my own family. That's what I want for our city. And my journey it hasn't been a linear path. I've done everything from be an actor to a bartender, to run my own consulting firm, to lead an environmental advocacy organization, to have a radio show, to journalism. I've had an adventure, and I've had a lot of different chapters in my life. But a consistent part of who I am since I was even a kid has always been that I'm not passive, that I just can't allow others to sort of make decisions for the world that I live in and think that I've got no part in it or I shouldn't make my voice heard. I was like that as a little kid, and I continue to be that way as a city councillor and as a part of our community.
Yeah, I think we determined before we started filming we have that in common.
We are both proverbial disturbers.
Yes, it's okay. You can swear if you choose to.
Okay. We can be shit disturbers once in a while.
Just sometimes. You pick your battles.
When there's a purpose.
And how long have you been a city councillor?
I've been a city councillor since 2011.
Okay. And were you in politics before that, or that was your kind of starting point?
I was involved in the school board.
Okay.
But I never grew up thinking that I'd get into politics. I wasn't one of those sort of kids in high school who just know that's
I'm going to be prime minister one day.
Yeah, that wasn't my dream. Yeah. But I mean, even when I was in the first grade, my parents would tell you a story when I had a teacher who had this, in my view, draconian rule that if you misbehaved, the first letter of your name would go up on the board. And then if you did something else, the next letter would be on the board. And if your whole name was written, you'd have to go down and see the principal. And I said that wasn't equitable because Stephanie could get away with murder, but Al was screwed. We never saw Al. He was always down in the principal's office. And so I suggested maybe we can change that. And so I organized a petition in the first grade with all of my fellow students, and we got the rule changed. And that's how I've always been. And I'm probably no different today.
That's incredible.
Thank you.
Okay, so one of the things that I've noticed recently you've been quite outspoken about. Now, for the sake of timeline, we're filming this at the beginning of December 2025. This will probably come out in the new year. So in the last couple of weeks, you've been very outspoken about Bill 60 and some things that's going on with that. So in November, just before, I guess, a couple weeks ago, Bill 60 was passed, and you had some concerns about its risks for residents, specifically in Toronto. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Roughly half of Torontonians are tenants. And I believe the tenants should have the right to have security of tenure. I believe in rent control. I believe that we don't need to have, I think, a senseless conflict that some people try to portray it as between building a supply of purpose-built rental and having rental that people can afford. I think we need both. I think we need both a supply, and there should be a supply of market rate, and we need more of it. Mm-hmm. But that also doesn't disclude the fact that we also have a lot of people who can't afford market rent, that need rent geared to income, that need far below market rent, because if they don't, they're going to be on the streets. And that's just a reality for far too many people. And Doug Ford began a consultation process where they were openly suggesting that they wanted to remove security of tenure, meaning that you have a right to remain in your home, term to term of your lease, along with removing rent control on all remaining units. They already removed rent control on new units being built after 2018. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. Both from the affordability perspective, which is critical for people to be able to live in an unaffordable city, but also it takes the power away from tenants to even feel comfortable raising a legitimate concern with their landlord. Imagine if you're a tenant and you have no idea if by complaining about a broken appliance, for example, or whatever it might be, or bed bugs, like whatever it is, then maybe your landlord will think that you're a problem and want to get rid of you and make it unaffordable or impossible for you to remain in your home. You may choose to remain silent. And my biggest concern with Bill 60, along with many other things that are moving forward, is that it's taking away the basic rights of tenants to be able to voice concerns when they're legitimate and also be able to remain in their homes at an affordable rent. So I've got a big concern with this government that they talk about affordability. They talk about being pro-housing. They talk about trying to create an Ontario and a Toronto that is more accessible to more people. But everything they've been doing is getting their friends rich. But more and more people are finding that the rents are going up, the prices are going up. It's unaffordable to both own and rent in Toronto and in Ontario. And Bill 60 is a disaster. So I spoke up. By the way, we were successful. We moved really swiftly.
Yeah.
So, working with ACORN, FMTA, other tenant advocacy organizations, we were successful in pushing back really hard and really clearly. And I think that's a lesson that if you don't capitulate to Doug Ford, but you stand up to a bully, you can win.
Yeah, and for anyone who might not know what specifically you're talking about, there was a point or an item in the bill that essentially at the end of your lease term currently in Ontario, the tenant has the right to stay on a month-to-month or weekly basis, however their lease was structured. And Bill 60 was proposing that at the end of your, say, 1-year lease, your landlord can say, okay, goodbye, and that's done, and you lose that kind of ability to stay.
That's right.
And that was removed before the bill was passed.
Yes.
So that...
and again, it's a really crappy bill. But those were arguably the two most concerning proposals that we needed to nip in the bud.
Yeah.
And we pushed back. And again, it is a lesson that, and this isn't like a left or right issue, this is about basic rights.
Yeah.
And that when any government is doing something that is just in no one's interest other than maybe their donors, but not the people, you have to push back. And you got to push back hard. And we were successful.
Yeah. I mean, that was a big win. And, from a real estate perspective, this kind of perpetuates the existing, there's a huge disconnect between landlords and tenants. And while we could say probably 90% of those relationships and those people are good people who, good tenants who want to keep the place and they want to pay their rent on time, they want to maintain the property, they just want a home, and good landlords who want the same. But then that small percentage of kind of both sides that will try to take advantage have really created quite a ruckus.
Well, most laws are written to protect us from the worst of us rather than assume that nobody's the best.
Yeah.
We have laws against breaking into banks. It doesn't mean that most people are bank robbers. It just means that we don't accept that as something that you should do in society.
As the norm. Yep.
And when I initiated RentSafe, for example, to protect tenants when there are property standards that are being ignored by their landlords, in no way does that mean to suggest that most landlords don't care about their tenants. I know that there are so many good landlords, and in particular small landlords, who are really supplementing their income or struggling with their mortgage, and they want to rent out part of their home. And frankly, that's great because it increases supply. We want to encourage that. And those landlords should be celebrated and supported. But there are factually some landlords, some big corporate landlords, who do treat their tenants just as sources of revenue rather than people whose homes they have a responsibility to keep up, to be safe and healthy places. And yes, they need to be challenged to do better.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, I think that perhaps, I don't know what your thoughts would be on a solution, but it feels like perhaps just having better efficiencies with the landlord and tenant board and that tribunal process could be more beneficial in helping when there are both bad landlords and bad tenants, as opposed to creating restrictions that will impact and hurt everyone, the good ones, kind of finding a better process for dealing with the ones that are not following the rules and are not being respectful of the process.
I mean, I agree with you that I think a lot of these debates that we have in our society become very polarizing and very artificially binary. You're either pro this or anti that. The reality is, of course, there are tenants who abuse the rules and take advantage of some landlords. Now, there's a power imbalance, though, and the large landlords who abuse the rights of their tenants, that is a bigger problem and that has to be addressed. But it doesn't mean that you ignore the other issues, too.
Sure, yeah.
And we need processes that are fair and that ensure that everybody plays by the rules, so that everybody, that if you're a small landlord renting out your basement, that you're not stuck in a nightmare scenario. But if you're a large landlord that treats your tenants like shit, that's not acceptable either.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one thing that I've found in working with both landlords and tenants when, either filling a rental space or finding a rental for the tenant, a real big issue that I've experienced on the real estate side of things is there's great fear and paranoia on both sides. Tenants are terrified of getting stuck with a landlord who is maybe not in the country and will not deal with any issues, or a landlord that doesn't care. And landlords are terrified of getting a tenant who's going to end up becoming a problem. And so both sides are there. There's so much burden in the due diligence and even paranoia that it's very difficult to kind of find a match. And it's also created, and I believe you've talked about this before as well, but there's landlords will really kind of look at a specific income marker for how much the tenant earns versus what the rental rate is, and don't necessarily consider, especially when we're looking at the lower rental points of our, I guess, market rate rentals, that, to kind of fit that threshold that a lot of people expect, tenants need to be making $70,000, $80,000 a year. And that's tough for a junior one bedroom apartment, like someone making $80,000 a year might not want to live in a junior one bedroom. And then where are the people who are making $40,000 a year supposed to go? And so it's created this huge disconnect and paranoia where neither side trusts each other and go in with an inherent kind of fear that something will go wrong, as opposed to going in trying to create a relationship so that the process moves smoothly throughout the tenancy.
And that's why a competent and effective government would create a process that is effective, that works, that deals with long queues that exist today, and make sure that the rules work for everyone, rather than pretend that just because there's maybe a problem tenant here or there, that the many millions of renters should see their rights just brushed away in one fell swoop, just because they're trying to please some of their donors and friends. I mean, that isn't how you create a system that works for everyone. That's picking sides. And frankly, the side of people, who have more power and more money than the average renter, who just wants to know that they're able to remain in their home and have a rent that they can afford. Yes, assuming that they are paying the rent and playing by the rules, as most people do. Yeah. Most people are just reasonable, decent people.
Yep. Yeah. It's like that in every area of life. Is the one bad person.
Yeah. So deal with them.
Yep.
So deal with them, and don't have everybody have to pay the price for one individual mistake.
Yeah. I'd love to get your thoughts on some policy things. I
love talking policy.
So from a policy perspective, when it comes to housing, do you think that the biggest barriers stem from policies that we currently have or policies that we're missing?
Yes.
Okay, both, all of the above.
Yeah, I mean, yes, because some of our policies are not working, and
Yeah.
we need either new policies or sometimes just reform the ones that we have, and it's a combination of it all. Just like, I mean, I think we've all learned that there is no one tool to fix the housing crisis, but there's a toolbox, and you need all of it together to be effective, and every level of government needs to play a role in it,
Yeah.
along with the private sector, meaning that we need a combination of, when it comes to renters, we need a combination of rent control, a reformation of the AGI system. We need to make sure that there is a adequate supply of market rental, which hopefully over time will help bring down prices, but at the same time, ensure that for those who really do need access to more affordable housing, that we move forward with the public builder model, we move forward with using public lands like parking lots and other properties to create rent-controlled properties that have a combination of deeply affordable prices along with rent-geared to income. In the private sector, we need to remove unnecessary barriers to building housing, both by reforming zoning policy, what we support in neighborhoods, often referred to as the missing middle, or...
That's my next point.
Oh, sorry, I don't mean to jump ahead.
It's okay. We'll get there.
But to segue, perhaps.
Yes.
Ensuring that there's a lot of different options and price points
Yep.
for people to be able to remain in the neighborhoods that they might have grown up in or dream of living in, both rental and ownership. Ownership is often forgotten in this discussion.
Yeah.
And I also believe that there are even like technical barriers that I've been trying to address. These are like really wonky, and I hope it doesn't bore you, but like I'll just make a couple of minor examples. Like type G loading. The city currently requires a certain height so that trucks can turn around inside of a new development.
Okay.
And does that always need to be the case? And should a developer always have to go through that expense? There's a thing called bathtubbing, where developers are told that they've got to create this like huge kind of facility to create a foundation to contain water. But that's not always necessary. So why should they always do it?
Right.
That can cost you millions of dollars. And there's these kind of wonky little things that if we get fixed, and I'm working on this, can save millions of dollars to actually make a pro forma work. So it's one thing to change the planning policy to allow for things to be built that can provide more housing. But if it's not financially realistic, it won't get built.
Yeah.
Just like some of our multiplexes that we're now supporting in the city of Toronto, it's one thing to say we allow it. But if we're charging DCs or other fees that just don't make it realistic to ever do it, it's not going to get done.
Yeah. And I mean, development charges are a huge part of the discussion too. And I mean, with new condos as well. A couple of years ago, I was on a panel with a big developer in Toronto, and I kind of decided to be a shit disturber, of course. And I posed the question of how can you justify charging $300, $400, $500 a square foot more than a resale condo sells for? Why would any buyer in their right mind pay that premium? And they didn't have an answer. And the best that they could offer is that that's how much they have to charge to make money. I mean, and I get it. It's the private sector. No one's going to build a condo for free. They want to make money. But part of the push is that the development charges in Toronto are so high that kind of pushes up the prices even more. And then it creates this whole other...
Well, I mean, I think there's a combination of factors. Sure. Like one of the factors that are impacting the popped bubble, so to speak, in the condo market is that investors have dried up. And it's really hard to finance, even with the rates coming down, unless you've owned the property for years. So I think a lot of condo developers are struggling right now. They tell me that, and they are looking for relief. The challenge for cities in Ontario is that because historically cities have been so dependent on DCs to cover costs for basic infrastructure that, and cities don't have a lot of other revenue tools. And unlike American cities that have city charters, they've got different ways to pay for things. Toronto, for example, is very limited to property tax, land transfer tax, DCs, but it doesn't have a huge menu for ways to bring in revenue to pay for the basics. And that's why I'd like to see a very different system where the city has the ability to cover infrastructure, social services, ensure that there is the capacity to provide a great quality of life for those who live here today and those who move here tomorrow, while still being able to pay for all of that without having to make the private sector cover as many costs as they've traditionally done.
Yeah.
And there is a path to do that, but we need to reimagine how cities pay for things. And I think that we need a diversity of a toolbox. I think we need a portion of the HST. I think that the federal government and the province should be offsetting DC relief. But there needs to be that movement.
And to follow your segue towards the missing middle, so anyone who has not heard this term, it's been a huge point of discussion in the city for a couple of years now, but the missing middle is essentially, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like light to medium density housing that is not overwhelming neighborhoods. It's not a 70-story building. It's, your 6-story walk up, kind of this piece of housing that we really don't see because it's either single family home or high-rise condo.
Yeah, I mean, the one clarification I would add is that the missing middle are really the people. And we need missing middle housing to ensure that those people have places that they can afford to live and live the life that they dream about having. The missing middle are people in our communities who may not be wealthy, but they're not at poverty level either. And people at poverty level also need rent-geared income, deeply affordable places to live. And I've got a lot of ideas on how to achieve that. But there's a lot of people who are, starting off their careers. They're making, kind of mid-range salaries. They're not poor, but they can't afford to live in a crazy, unaffordable city where, buying a house, you literally need to be a millionaire to do that. And by providing more options within our neighborhoods, different price points, different built forms, different numbers of units, I think we can achieve that. Our biggest challenge to getting there has been, again, this, I referred to earlier, these sort of nonsensical binary debates that we have.
Right.
And there's been this sort of NIMBY-YIMBY fight over what should be allowed in neighborhoods. And, some YIMBYs will say, just build, build, build. And NIMBYs will say, I don't want any change. And YIMBYs will say, well, but we're in a housing crisis, so let's build whatever we want.
Yeah.
And the NIMBYs will say, well, but I love the character of my neighborhood. And then, of course, YIMBYs will say, you're using character as a euphemism for keeping people out.
Yeah.
But what if we find things that we agree on? Maybe character can really be better defined as true character.
Yep.
What about materiality and design? Maybe we can care less about how many people live in a building, whether they be families or individuals. I shouldn't care whether you are a family or one individual or a couple. That's not my business if I'm your neighbor.
Yep.
But maybe we can have a conversation about how beautiful we want our city to be built, both built form and also our streetscapes.
Yeah. Well, so a couple of years ago, my fiance and I went to New York. This was his first time going to New York. And for months after our trip, he would not stop talking about how cool all the buildings are there and how there's so much, you walk the streets of New York and when you're on street level, you don't feel that change because you don't feel it until you look up. Whereas here, a lot of our condos look the exact same. It's very boring. And so I think something like what you said, there are ways that it can be done without drastically changing the look and feel of a neighborhood, but still allowing for housing for people who are kind of in that middle section. And I mean, another huge issue that we have with condos specifically is that they are very much many are built for investors, and they are small and not livable and not functional. And so, a family with 2 kids who wants to be in Midtown, for example, but can't afford a house in Midtown, they don't have that option of a livable space that is not a single family home.
You're absolutely right.
And something like that, you know, you look at Danforth, for example, like think all of those shops and restaurants on Danforth, you just add a couple stories on top and you add some units. It's not going to drastically change the look and feel of the neighborhood. People really aren't going to notice that there's a couple of extra stories on it because the streetscape's going to look and feel the same. And I think that's a big piece.
Absolutely. And I think a far more, I mean, beauty is subjective.
Sure.
But I think a far more productive debate should be over whether a building has a gable or if it's bricks or like what materiality we use to fit into whatever that character might be in the community, rather than should we or should we not ensure that people have different price points to be able to access an affordable home. And I'd love it if the debate got into that rather than should we make our city affordable. Of course we should. And I agree that, like, I go to cities around the world that are beautiful. We are inspired by the architecture we see around us. We're inspired by the design of our urban landscape. And I moved a motion recently, actually called Toward a Beautiful City, that does emphasize everything from the street furniture we have on our sidewalks to the kind of buildings we build, because I want a city that is beautiful and inspiring, beautifully designed, one that we really love and contributes to our well-being. But ultimately, let's not debate whether or not it should be affordable and if more people should have access to more options.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I mean, I live in Leslieville, and I think Leslieville has done a good job of maintaining that. You know, you're in Leslieville and you see the rainbow colored benches, so you know you're in Leslieville because that's kind of the staple and the trademark. And we do actually have quite a few, you know, medium density projects in the neighborhood, and it hasn't drastically changed the feel. You walk around, you don't feel like you're in a different neighborhood. You don't feel like you're in a condo concrete jungle. It's very much still, it feels like a community.
It's about design.
Yeah.
It's about design. And, you know, I would even add that I think the root of some of the, and again, I know that Yimbys and NIMBYs often have trouble talking with each other, but the root of some of the so-called NIMBY concern is often the worry that if there's too many people living in the same neighborhood, that there'll be a decline in quality of life. Now, whether one agrees or not, or if they think that they're unreasonable or not, that is a genuine root of some of the concern. So I think we all need to do a better job, and this is what I've been encouraging through our city plans, let's address that, let's lean into it. Because if there's enough school capacity, if there's childcare, if there's beautifully designed parks, if there's places to go so that you live a great life, that's good for those who live here today and all of your new neighbors.
Yep.
That's what new neighbors want as well. So I don't think it should be an either or. Let's build communities that are complete and successful, that are beautifully designed and affordable. If we do that, then everybody wins. And let's stop fighting over it.
It's almost, you're such a politician. It's almost like you knew I was going to talk about infrastructure later.
No,
I'm just kidding.
No, I'm not a politician. I'm able to see through your cue cards. Go for it.
I definitely do want to touch more on infrastructure and community, because that is a huge issue that I personally feel we have in many areas of Toronto. But just before we wrap up this discussion of, you know, the kind of rental and affordable housing, I did want to talk a little bit about some of the affordability barriers I'm seeing in my industry and your thoughts on how we can kind of combat those. So I know we've talked about the missing middle. We talked about, you know, how condos are very much built for investors. I think something that would make a huge difference is now that we're in this kind of a shift in how the pre-construction market and the new condos are looking, perhaps there can be some sort of a discussion with developers on how we can build livable condos as opposed to shoeboxes with no personality. Yeah. And I'm sure that there's something that can be done between developers in the city, but that kind of drives a lot of people to want to buy freehold. And then we deal with the massive competition for the starter price range of freeholds, as we're seeing 5, 10, 15. I last month was offering on a house that had 18 offers. 18 people are bidding on one house. that means 17 buyers are going to continue looking for something else. And so there's this push and this demand for an entry-level home because those people don't want to be in condos, and it's then driving up the prices of the starter home. So that is like probably the number one barrier I'm seeing for buyers, or especially first-time buyers.
What I'm hearing from industry leaders is that investors are drying up, that it's not going to be, we're not going to see a continuation of just tower. The market will most likely, over the next 3 years, move toward mid-rise, taller mid-rise, in the teens perhaps. And it shouldn't just be restricted to, our avenues. Where I see the city and the province can play a role is, rather than looking at DCs as this static fee, we should be using it more like a lever and use it as an incentive for the kind of housing that we know we need a supply of.
Right.
I'd like to see us provide more relief to developers that are willing to build family-size units. And because, again, it comes down to the pro forma. It comes down to what is feasible, what's realistic. If we make it more affordable for the developer to build the kind of housing that we need more of, more developers will do it. Some out of the goodness of their heart, but let's get real. Many will do it because they see, wait a sec, it is actually more affordable for us to build that.
Yeah.
And I've learned over the years that the best wins are not necessarily when one defeats the other. It's when it's a win-win.
Yep.
And then you can do it again. And I think it's a win for the city, and it's a win for the developer. And frankly, we wouldn't be getting those DCs anyway if housing isn't being built in the first place. So I think it's a win for the city because we get more family-size units, and it's a win for the builder because they actually get to move forward and get shovels in the ground.
Yeah, totally. And, on the topic of taxes and such, another huge barrier.
Everyone's favorite topic.
I personally have a spreadsheet, so I like tax season, but I'm very type A, so.
Everyone's got their thing. This is taxes. Go on.
Got to keep it interesting. But one of the other issues, and you kind of touched on it before, is that to buy a house, you need to have a lot of cash. And on top of the down payment, there are closing costs, land transfer tax being the most expensive, hands down closing cost, specifically in Toronto. And that is because we have what I like to refer to as the Toronto tax, but that's not what it's actually called. It's the municipal land transfer tax, which was implemented in 2008. So can you touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, no, I couldn't imagine having a conversation with a real estate agent where that doesn't come up. And I get it. I mean, I fundamentally disagree with that being a tax that we use to pay for core services out of, because it essentially is a mobility tax. But it also is an unpredictable source of revenue, meaning how do you really budget in the long term for our city's needs if you don't really know what the market is going to bring in for you?
Yep.
So it's not the best tool. I believe that it exists, as I alluded to earlier, because the city doesn't have many tools provided to it. And again, unlike US cities and cities around the world that actually have the legal ability to determine their needs and then how they bring in revenue, Canadian cities are restricted to what their provinces allow them to do or not. So I would like Doug Ford to provide Toronto more flexibility to effectively run its local government, pay for things, plan its own city. But today it doesn't. Actually, you see that Doug Ford does more and more, cosplaying as mayor than ever. And it's not helpful. I want Toronto to be an effective and accountable level of government. But right now it's hooked onto the land transfer tax because over the past decade, more and more basic core services that it provides is paid for through that.
Yeah.
So we need to find an offset. So I'm not opposed to removing it, but we need to work together to get the province to finally say, okay, If not that, then what?
Right.
Because I still want roads to be paved. I want parks to be maintained. I want the bathrooms fixed. I want all of that to be done too. But we need to work together to achieve that.
Yeah, I completely agree. The land transfer tax, yeah. And also, I mean, you know, like you said, it's unpredictable. Housing prices change.
They are.
The land transfer tax is marginal, so the amount that the city is getting from the land transfer tax varies based on the purchase price or the sale price of the home.
What if the province today agreed that Toronto, a city that has a population larger than many provinces, Canada's largest city, should have even a percentage of the HST that goes towards municipal priorities? That would be incredibly helpful for two reasons. It would offset the land transfer tax and more, but it's also a revenue tool that grows with the economy.
Right.
That would be helpful. So I'm just floating that.
So that's, well, I wish I personally could be the one that implements that change, but...
Well, if you run for premier, let me know.
No, thank you. If you like what you're seeing so far, don't forget to hit subscribe and check out my other socials. There was a rumor for a long time that I did some research and supposedly is not actually true, but there was like apparently a law that said you couldn't drag a dead horse up Yonge Street on Sundays, but every other day is acceptable.
I actually moved a motion to clean up our parks bylaws because I was like, don't judge me, although you said you keep spreadsheets on taxes. I was reading through the parks bylaws on a lovely Sunday night.
We all have our thing that we're nerds on, and that's okay.
Yep. And I started reading these like bizarrely archaic rules that we have in our city. For example, like, and we're still working on it, but like, for example, you're not allowed to climb a tree in a park. I didn't know that. So in other words, kids who are climbing trees are scofflaws. They're breaking the rules, which is absurd. You are not allowed to fly a kite without a permit. You're not allowed to, and this is what you said earlier provoked this memory. According to the city bylaws, you're not allowed to use a stun gun on a dog in a park.
But not in a park is okay.
Which again makes me, I've got questions about that. I'm not suggesting for a moment that I disagree with the principle of that bylaw. I disagree with shooting dogs.
Anywhere, not just parks.
But it's just so specific. And it makes me wonder if it was done in a reaction to an incident happening over the past few decades. So there's a lot of those kind of weird ones. And then there's even things about performance art. Like you're not allowed to perform certain performances, but but spoken word and poetry is allowed. So there's even this like subjective thing about what is acceptable performance art.
In parks.
In parks, in particular. Oh, you're not allowed to land a hot air balloon in a park. Or launch one.
Where would you launch your hot air balloon?
I mean, that is going to be a struggle for hot air balloon enthusiasts.
Huh. Okay. Any other weird ones?
Like, part of the motion that I moved was, well, partially was about cleaning up these sort of stupid, archaic ones.
Sure.
But also, let's look at what we actually do want to allow, rather than just what we don't want to allow.
Yeah.
I've traveled... Most cities, like I was the one who initiated having responsible adults being allowed to have a drink in a park.
Right.
Because like cities around the world allow that, and the zombie apocalypse has not happened and the sky didn't fall, and people who act responsibly continue to, and people who are irresponsible are like that. So let's deal with them. But why should we just say that you can't grab a beer with a friend on a park bench or have some wine while you're having a picnic with your family? When, like, some people have the privilege of having backyards, but many Torontonians don't.
Yeah.
And the parks are where they go to get some sunshine and a place to have fun. And why shouldn't you be able to have the same enjoyment?
Yeah.
I would add that many parks in cities around the world allow for different types of vendors.
Right.
Where you can even have like a little cafe and stop and have a coffee and meet up with friends.
Yeah.
Grab a sandwich and sit somewhere. Why shouldn't we allow for more animation and more options?
Yeah, my family is from Serbia. Well, former Yugoslavia, but I go to Belgrade often enough.
Yeah.
And they've got stuff like that in parks. They've got like little ice cream stands, and they'll have like a little coffee stand. It's great. You can walk. It encourages you to want to be outside. You know, you're not just going to the park for the swings. Like there's other things to do.
Yeah.
That actually is the topic that I had next is infrastructure and parks and, you know, kind of how much the community amenities impact where people want to live. And from my perspective, you know, the top things that I will see, you know, buyers specifically looking for in a neighborhood are parks. And, you know, it's Toronto. Everyone's got a dog. So having kind of spaces where you can walk your dog, having, you know, I mean, downtown, where's the dog going to go to the bathroom? So there actually being greenery and parks and transit. Those are kind of the biggest amenities that I see people wanting. What are your thoughts on infrastructure and communities?
I think the way, from my experience, the way that provincial legislation, planning legislation is written, doesn't consider how infrastructure and social services should keep pace with growth. And so therefore we fall into these YIMBY-NIMBY debates over should we have a lot more people moving into an area, or can the area provide for all these new people, and therefore people get fearful about supporting more people moving in.
And then it becomes
it's a vicious cycle. And I just think it's stupid, and let's get through it. What I would like to see is planning policy. Certainly what I advocate for is planning policy that considers all of this. In other words, we need more housing. We need supply of housing. We need to both accommodate a growing population, but we also want to make sure that it's affordable for people who live here today and for those who move here tomorrow to be able to live in this city. Everyone should have access to a beautiful park, a place there should be local school capacity. There should be daycares. There should be a variety of social services, including health-related, mental and mental health and physical health-related, and also vibrant main streets, where we have fine grain retail and independent cafes and shops, rather than just big shoppers, drug marts, and banks. We want to plan our communities in ways that are really livable for everyone, livable and affordable. But there's a disconnect in provincial policy, and it doesn't connect the dots. And one of the reasons that we're hearing from developers saying that DCs are too high and it makes it unrealistic to meet a pro forma to move forward with projects is that over the years, cities have become far too dependent on the developers to pay for things that, yes, should support the growth that's associated with their new building, but frankly, also should be a more holistic view on how you build a neighborhood. And it shouldn't be on that one developer to pay for the whole city. There needs to be just an automatic system.
And better collaboration.
Exactly.
Well, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about. I mean, we see certain neighborhoods that become condo-centric neighborhoods, and the infrastructure always lags behind. You'd think that it would be quicker to put in a park than it would be to put in a condo, but somehow we are always seeing all these condos go up with no infrastructure around. Difficult, you know, it's difficult for transit to get there. And so now and I mean, mind you, we are aiming to be a less car forward city, but then we have, and the condos are not building parking spots for every unit, but then we don't have a grocery store that's within walking distance, or the grocery stores drive me crazy, especially some neighborhoods in the kind of downtown east don't have any grocery stores close by. And then the No Frills at Sherbourne and Front, for example, is going to close. Where's everyone going to go?
I'll give you a case example. In the Yonge and Eglinton area, in the Davisville Village neighborhood, which is a really tightly, densely packed apartment neighborhood, we've been facing the same challenges. So what we've had to do, even beyond policy, is just get creative and work with property owners, work with the community, and find creative solutions. And I'll give you a couple examples. There was an infill project proposed on a green space that looks like a park, feels like a park, but is not a park. It's called the Al Green Parkette on Beloyal, but it's really green space that's owned by the developer. The developer wanted to infill it, and the community was outraged because for people who don't have outdoor access in their units, it's the only place to go. This was not YIMBY-NIMBY. It was a legitimate concern. It wasn't anti-housing. It was just like, what about our park?
Yeah, where's
Fair.
our park going to go?
Completely fair. So we worked with the property owners across the street that were looking at redeveloping their properties and assembled enough land to support the growth of new housing while ensuring that we could accrue enough property that we could actually create a real bona fide park that was even larger than the green space that we were losing.
Right.
Now, we did that because we found partners to work together on and we were creative, but it shouldn't, when I said earlier that there should be a system in place, we did that, but we shouldn't have to do that. There should be a system in place that assures that that happens.
I was going to say, I don't know that I've ever heard of the city working on a land assembly.
Yeah, but we were intentional, and fortunately there were developers there who understood what the idea of a win-win looked like. Mm-hmm. So I was actually able to write a letter to the community who many of whom are very anti-new development because they're stressed about their quality of life being impacted.
Yeah.
And I wrote a letter.
And a lot of people in that neighborhood have seen a ton of change. I mean, I went to Northern and... You get it. You know the area. Yeah. And when I was at Northern, there were maybe 2 condo buildings and a couple rental buildings. Yep. And now it's like condos are everywhere. And the people who are on like Roehampton, for example, saw a street of houses turn into a street of condos.
But people need to know what is the benefit to my life?
Totally.
So I was able to write a letter to the community where I was straight about it. I said, these developments are worth approving because not only are we supporting more housing, but importantly for everyone, we are getting a brand new, remarkable park. This is a genuine, inarguable benefit for everyone in the community, including the new residents and those of you who live here today. Similarly, to make way for a new development at Yonge and Davisville, a couple of like those small grocers, those fruit markets that are like really affordable, great produce, were shut down.
I was going to say, they just recently.
And that was, you might have seen that on social media. There was a big uproar about that. My family and I use it too because you can't find better, fresher, more affordable produce in the area. It's amazing.
And you're supporting local.
And you're supporting local small businesses. So rather than just go, well, that's too bad, that's the way things work, let's manage the change. So that development's going to move forward. But what we did is we reached out to the grocers and then we reached out to other property owners and we actually worked with them to ensure that there were alternative spaces nearby. They're both going to reopen soon.
Oh, great.
And we're still going to have them. So new housing, new parks. We got a new aquatic center that's being built as well. So my view is, pragmatically, rather than just cry about the things you don't want to change, my view is let's manage change and let's make sure that we get what we actually want for everyone. Yeah. Recreation parks, great businesses, etc.
Yeah. One neighborhood that I feel like has done a pretty good job of redevelopment was Regent Park. Mm-hmm. Because they, and I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of how that worked in the logistics, but, now the neighborhood still has a lot of community housing and it blends in with the condos and with the purpose-built rentals, but they also have grocery stores close by and there's schools and there are parks and there's the aquatic center. So that's a neighborhood that went through a huge change, but still has infrastructure that supports the residents that live there. Now, again, I don't know the details on it and how well it actually functions, but from an outsider's perspective, that is one that seems like it's done it relatively successfully.
Yeah, and that was under the leadership of Councillor Pam McConnell, who's now deceased. But she worked with her community and the city on making sure that there was good planning for Regent Park. Mm-hmm. There are still challenges there.
Of course.
And there are people like Walid Kagali and many others in the community on the ground who are still advocating for better and more but the principle of rather than just reacting to each new proposal, but actually having a plan for it. Yep. And making sure that, and we did this by the way in Midtown Toronto with the Midtown in Focus plan, where if you actually have a plan for the neighborhood, you actually can manifest a vision. and rather than scramble every time somebody wants change. Change is going to happen. That is a reality. So why don't we manage it and do something good with it?
Yep. So I did want to ask you, because you've talked a lot about the closure of the Science Centre. What kind of impact do you think that closure has had on the local community?
When Doug Ford decided to declare the Science Centre as some disaster zone with a roof that was about to collapse, first of all, it was a lie. We've gone through a couple of winters now. That roof is still up. And in my view, that roof at the Science Centre has more integrity than the Ford government's story. It had a big impact on the community, Flemington Park, Thorncliffe Park, the Don Mills neighborhood, because they believe, and I agree with them, that we should have cultural institutions accessible to every part of our city. There's a cultural hub there. There's the Japanese Center nearby. There's the Aga Khan. Yeah. It's an area that supports both the local neighborhood, but also the whole northern region of our city and beyond. Mm-hmm. And we just shouldn't have everything down on the lakeshore. Yeah. So that is hurting that community that also relied on the Science Centre for jobs and educational opportunities for their kids. Mm-hmm. A neighborhood that is racialized, that that are looking for opportunities for their families, and they got shortchanged. Yeah. So I'm working with activists on the ground, like the Save the Science Centre group, on finding ways to move forward with that building so that it continues to support the local community. And I'm moving a motion at council to ensure that the city, because the city is actually the property owner beneath the buildings, ensures that building is kept in good repair.
And I mean, I vaguely remember when that first came out in the news that there were a number of people who offered to donate large amounts of money to go towards the repair of the roof so that the Science Centre could stay open and in that location. And it seemed like that didn't go anywhere.
They're still there, and they're incredible people. Yeah. And I mean, that's how a lot of great cultural institutions are funded in the States. Yeah. We should be better at that in Canada, I believe. Yeah. But the Ford government, for whatever reason, were determined to shutter it in Flemington Park and then reopen a smaller version of it as part of a complex near their new private spa at Ontario Place. And they've never really revealed what this whole plan is or why they're privatizing our lakefront for an Austrian company that has been known to pretend to be something that they're not. I see Toronto as a city that can be a great global city that also supports its local communities. We've got 1 foot in the past and we've got 1 foot in the future. But when I go to cities around the world, I see ways that they're taking on affordability. I see how they're improving the design of their buildings and their streetscapes. I see how when you visit them, there are so many wonderful places to visit. Mm-hmm. In Toronto, because of Doug Ford, we're seeing fewer places for families and other people to go. Yeah. I think we can do a lot better. And the Science Centre was a remarkable institution that Doug Ford allowed to be shuttered under false pretenses. And I've got a problem with that because it stole something from the Don Mills community, but it also was based on a lie. And I don't think government should work that way.
Do you think there's any hope for it reopening in that location?
Doug Ford has said that he's not going to reopen the Science Centre in Flemington Park. So let's reimagine what it can be. Okay. I believe that if it can continue to be a public property serving the public interest, whether it be a natural science museum, whether it be another type of facility that's focused on education and entertainment and something that will provide jobs and learning opportunities, let's work with something. And like I said about the win-win, Doug Ford is going to have his little Science Centre next to the private spa downtown. Well, even if it's not exactly what it was, maybe it can be something even better. And then it can be a win for everyone. So that's what I'm focusing on.
Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about the Eglinton line.
Oh, God. Yes.
Obviously, transit is a huge piece of Toronto. A lot of people here don't have cars, rely on transit. I don't even know how long it's been.
Over 15 years.
As I mentioned earlier, I went to Northern, and I recall the construction disrupting my commute because I did not grow up in that neighborhood. So I had to take the subway and then the other subway and then the bus. And I was, at the time, I was like, oh, maybe one day this will be great. And it's been, so many years, and it's still not open. As I said, it's December 2025. I've heard someone say it's going to open in the next couple of weeks. What do you think?
I don't believe it's going to open this year. I'm hearing maybe February now of 2026. We will see if that's true. But the debacle, the fiasco of the Eglinton line construction has meant years of delays, businesses that have shut down, communities that have had unmanageable traffic, a cost overrun of over $1 billion tax dollars, and everyone cheated out of the transit that we were promised to have many years ago. Metrolinx, a provincial transit agency, has been unaccountable. They have not been transparent about the problems. And, we've seen on the Finch line that recently opened that because of the lack of accountability and transparency about even things and proactive considerations like ensuring that there's transit signal priority to make sure that rapid transit would actually be more rapid than the buses that it was replacing. That's gone sideways.
I saw someone do the math and say that the Finch line is slower than a jogger.
Metrolinx has one job: provide transit. And in this case, their rapid transit was slower than the buses. Like $3.7 billion later, years of delays later, this is what we've been given. And I was even ringing the alarm bells months ago.
Yeah.
Telling people, including like everyone, if the LRT lines don't have transit signal priority, it's going to be a failure, because you cannot have a train waiting for cars to turn left at an intersection. That's absurd.
So for anyone who might not understand, so transit signal priority is the traffic light.
So to say it plainly, for Eglinton, for example, much of it will be underground. Mm-hmm. But when it is surface rail, the difference between it and a streetcar, there are many differences, but this is a vehicle that will have its own grade separated right of way, meaning that it goes down the middle of the road. It's not in the middle of traffic. Mm-hmm. That's a really good thing. Mm-hmm. But it does go through some intersections. Yeah. Transit signal priority, in the most aggressive form that I'm asking for, is that there is technology on both the vehicle and at the traffic lights that speak to each other. So when the vehicle is moving forward toward the intersection, they speak to each other.
Right.
And they say, I'm coming through. And then the light changes to give priority for that vehicle to move. The benefit of that is that it doesn't need to slow down or stop. It can continue moving fast.
Got it.
Which decreases your commuter time. And the benefit to car drivers is that, well, yes, you'll have to wait a moment for that to happen. You will now have fewer people competing with you on the road in traffic because more people will actually see the TTC as the better way.
Right. So you've been very outspoken about this.
Yes. And
not long ago, you called on the provincial government for a public inquiry into what went wrong.
Yes.
Is there any progress on that?
Not at all.
Okay.
And it frustrates me because Metrolinx and the provincial government need to be publicly accountable. And this is not just to go after Doug Ford, which, by the way, I'm very happy to do because I think he's a dreadful premier and an abysmal failure. And I could go on. But the reason that I want a public inquiry into what happened on Eglinton is because there needs to be transparency and accountability for the mistakes that were made. What was wrong with the P3 contract that led to Metrolinx being successfully sued by their own contractors time and time again? Why did all those delays happen? Why did the cost overruns happen? Why was this project done in such a way that it left businesses and residents as collateral damage rather than part of the success of the plan? I want to know that both to hold them to account, but even more importantly, frankly, I don't believe that any group, public group, can rebuild public trust if they don't demonstrate that they've learned from those mistakes. And frankly, Metrolinx is the same organization that is building the Ontario line, the Scarborough line, and other lines. And how do we know that they're not going to have the same mistakes happen again if they don't demonstrate that they understand what went wrong and they fix them?
You're reading through my cards again.
I am right through.
Yeah, that was my question. Do you think we'll see the same issues with the Ontario line?
And my honest answer is, I don't know yet, because they haven't demonstrated that they've learned from their mistakes.
Right.
I see government no differently, the relationship with the government no differently than even an interpersonal relationship. Like, would you not agree that, let's say if a partner or a friend screws something up,
Mm-hmm.
we need to hear that they get it. There's some contrition, that they can explain to us how they've learned from that.
Yep.
And they can demonstrate that they're not going to make the same mistake, and they need to show us how they've learned. And you can heal and you can rebuild trust if you've gone through that process. And government should act no differently. I want Metrolinx to succeed. As much as I think Doug Ford is a shitty premier, I actually want him to do good work. I will applaud him when he does good things. But how do we know that they've learned anything if they're not even willing to admit that they've done something wrong?
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I think so many Toronto residents have questions about what went wrong with the Eglinton line, why it's been delayed. What is it, 5 years now?
And they deserve to know the answers. They paid for it. It's theirs.
Yep. Yeah. And I'm seeing the same thing with the Ontario line in the sense that the stations are pretty much built, like the buildings, but then how long is it going to take for the trains to be ready? And are those buildings just going to be collecting dust, or could those local businesses have stayed open for 2 more years while they finished the actual infrastructure?
And that's what I mean by the businesses being treated like collateral damage. Yeah. They put up hoarding. They say, hey, this business is so open, blah, blah, blah. But I believe that businesses need actual support from government when they're taking it on the chin for the rest of us.
Yeah.
During COVID, not that you can compare COVID with a public works project, but the one comparison I would argue, is that businesses were asked to restrict seating, to do difficult things that impacted the business owners and the staff's livelihood for the greater good of society, for public health.
Yep.
When we're building a big transit project and we are disrupting the lives and the success of a business, why shouldn't we have their backs and say, we want you to benefit from the construction. We want you to survive long enough to benefit from it. And we're going to look at ways to cut your costs to support you to make sure that you can get through this. And Metrolinx doesn't do that, and I think that's wrong.
Yeah. So in your opinion, what changes do you think could make transit more accessible, reliable, and convenient for Torontonians?
Oh, do we have another 4 hours?
No.
I know. To say it really simply then, I believe that if we want to decrease reliance on cars, if we want a city that actually moves people around, and we want less congestion and traffic, we really do need to have a transit system that is expansive, like cities we envy around the world. But those big maps can't just be colorful pictures. We need transit that is fast, that's reliable, that people feel safe on. Mm-hmm. And there are ways to do that. I mean, safety is everything from ensuring that you've got the personnel and the transparency in the stations and the supports down there, so that if you are, if you're in many cases, to say it candidly, if you're a young single woman traveling late at night, you know that you've got people to go to if you are feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of people telling me that they'd rather take an Uber rather than take the subway because of those worries, right?
Yeah.
If you are that we need to deal with people getting onto the tracks, both because we don't want to see tragedies happen, but also that's also one of the leading causes of the delays that we're experiencing on the subway system.
Yeah.
We need to look at platform edge doors. We need to look at ways to prevent those delays, because if those delays are happening, then And if it's less reliable, then people won't take it because you don't know if you're going to get to work or school in time.
Yep.
We need to keep the costs down as well. We need a better model at funding transit as well. We need the province to fund operating costs the way that they used to. I could go through a long list, but ultimately, it's not difficult to do. It's just difficult to get there because we don't have the funding and we don't have the best governance.
Yeah. Okay, so kind of just a few things to wrap up. I did want to ask you, what is your vision for the city in the next 10 to 20 years? Well, what kind of reform or innovation would you really like to see?
My vision for Toronto is a city that is affordable, that has a beautiful quality of life. I want older residents to see a city that is accessible and caring and respectful, the way that we design it. I want younger residents to know that it can't just be the earlier generations that can afford homes and then pull the ladder up with them, but that we're going to make sure that there's a place for you as well.
Yep.
I want a city that is both a global city that attracts visitors and businesses and a vibrant and successful economy, but always keeps an eye on the basics and the details of how to create a quality of life for every resident who lives here, to be able to get around safely. And ultimately, I view Toronto as both a city that I represent others at City Hall for, but also a city that my 12-year-old daughter is growing up in, and one that I want her to be able to have a great quality of life in too.
Yeah. Now, you don't have to answer this if you don't have an answer for it yet, but what are your long-term plans? Do you think you'll run for mayor again?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. I want to do the work where I can have the most impact. I love the city so much. I love my neighbors. I love my community. When I talk about my community, it's not just my local Midtown Toronto community. I've built relationships in communities throughout the city. I use this city as part of my own neighborhood.
Yeah.
Whatever role that I can play that I feel is meaningful, I will play. And when it comes to political careers, a lot has to do with timing. It has to do with just the reality of the moment and knowing when your moment is that moment. But I love what I'm doing today, and we'll see. I'll let you know though.
Please.
I will.
Yeah, let me know. Last question. Do you have a fun fact about Toronto that you want to share?
A fun fact about Toronto.
Yes. We could talk about the chickens.
You want to talk about?
We could talk about the chickens.
Can I tell you one thing, the first thing that came to mind,
Please.
and then we'll go to the chickens?
Absolutely.
But I want to talk about the chickens.
Yeah,
yes
tell
to
me.
the chickens.
Yeah.
I learned this a little while ago. I've been working on both preserving Old City Hall, but also opening a museum of Toronto at Old City Hall.
Okay.
And because I want to celebrate our city, and I want a place to take all the archives, all the artifacts out of these dusty warehouses and share them.
Yeah.
E.J. Lennox, the architect of Old City Hall, was so frustrated with the city council of the day when he was building it, created caricatures of the aldermen at the time, the city councilors, at the front of the building. So actually, if you go to Old City Hall, you will see these like ghastly looking faces looking at you. And that was his impression of the local politicians at the time.
That's really funny.
It's a weird little fact, but it was fun. Now, chickens, you asked about chickens.
Yes.
What do you want to know about chickens?
So there was a bylaw.
Yes.
That you told me had a pretty funny name, but for a while that allowed people to have like chickens in their backyard in Toronto.
Yeah. They called it the Urban Hen Pilot. TO.
Of course.
Everything had a TO. And it allowed for residents in certain parts of the city to have up to 4 hens.
Only
in their
hens,
backyard.
no roosters.
Yeah.
Okay.
They'd be a little noisy.
Well, I don't know.
I guess,
Hens are
I guess.
also noisy.
I'm not an expert in chickens.
Okay.
Deliberately. I mean,
Okay.
I'll digress.
Okay.
But yes, they allowed people who wanted to have chickens.
And do we know why?
Because there are chicken enthusiasts.
I see.
And there were members of council who were like really into chickens.
Naturally.
Of course. And they wanted the ability to have chicken. One councillor even had chickens in his own backyard. And listen, there are people who, I get it. There's a local food movement that having like fresh eggs in your backyard is a part of, and I get that. But there are also concerns that have been raised about the ability to enforce how you keep chickens in your backyard, how those chickens might affect your neighbors, and also how the raccoons might affect the chickens if they get hungry too. So it became a bit ridiculous, and ultimately my view was we have an affordability housing crisis in our city. We've got congestion problems. We've got safety concerns. There are real issues that people want City Council to focus on, and I was
Chickens are not on
disinterested
the top of that
to
list.
be generous about having more debates about chickens.
That's fair. And as of, I think we said 2023, you no longer can have chickens.
The chickens have flown the coop.
Well, and as I told you recently, in the last couple of months, I've shown more than one house where I could see into the neighbor's backyard that they had pigeon coops / farms. You did not appreciate that.
I think
It seems like a bylaw violation,
yeah,
right?
it does.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're allowed to keep a certain number of pets, typically cats and dogs, and maybe gerbils and goldfish and things like that. But now you mentioned earlier that you like alpacas. You're not allowed to do that, unfortunately.
Yeah, like an alpaca in my backyard could be great,
Yes.
but it's not allowed.
You're not allowed to have a herd of sheep to entertain your dogs.
My border collie,
Exactly.
yes.
And there are reasons for that, because we live in a big city and we live really close to each other. And like, listen, my view generally is have regulations and rules that protect people's health and safety. There are many rules that we don't need, and if it gets in the way of responsible adults living their lives, maybe we should get rid of them, and I advocate for that.
Yeah. So,
But ultimately, it is a bit much to have a farm in your backyard when you're living literally feet away from your neighbor.
yeah. So, in summary, let's prioritize affordable housing and
Yes.
livable housing and a livable city, and focus less on how many chickens you can have in your backyard. We can get there once we've solved the other problems.
I never want to have another debate about chickens at Toronto City Council.
Okay.
Yeah.
This will be the end of the chicken discussion for you.
Yes. Chicken debates don't fly. I'm sorry. I had to. It was right there.
It's really good.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you again for coming on. This has been very enlightening and entertaining.
My delight. Thank you for having me here.